Harriet Tubman was born into slavery in Maryland in 1822. She escaped alone in 1849 and immediately began going back. 13 times she returned to the South. 13 missions along the Underground Railroad. She rescued approximately 70 people at a time when the penalty for what she was doing was death. When the Civil War started, she did not stop. She became a Union spy and scout, leading intelligence missions behind Confederate lines. In June of 1863, she guided 3 Union steamships up the Combahee River in the dead of night and liberated more than 700 enslaved people in a single operation, becoming the first woman in American history to lead an armed military raid. After the war, she spent the rest of her life fighting for women's right to vote. She died in 1913, 7 years before the 19th Amendment was ratified.
She never stopped, not because she was fearless, but because the work was not finished. Questions 91 through 100 are about the work that was not finished, the wars the United States fought, the rights it expanded, the amendments it ratified, the long, incomplete, still continuing effort to live up to what the founders put on paper. By the end of this episode, you will not just know the answers, you will understand the story they are part of.
5 questions from last time. Answer out loud. What founding document was written in 1787? Answer: the Constitution. The Federalist Papers supported the passage of the US Constitution. Name one writer. Answer: Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, or John Jay. Name one thing Thomas Jefferson did. Answer: wrote the Declaration of Independence, purchased the Louisiana Territory, or served as the 3rd president. Who did the United States fight in the War of 1812? Answer: Great Britain. Name one of the 2 longest rivers in the United States. Answer: the Missouri River or the Mississippi River.
If any of those were difficult, go back to episode 9 before continuing. Now let us move forward.
Name one war fought by the United States in the 1800s. The United States fought 4 significant wars in the 1800s, and any one of them is an acceptable answer for this question. The War of 1812, which we covered in episode 9, was fought against Great Britain from 1812 to 1815. The Mexican-American War, fought from 1846 to 1848, resulted in Mexico ceding a vast territory to the United States that included present-day California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. The Civil War, the most devastating conflict in American history, was fought from 1861 to 1865 over slavery and the survival of the Union. And the Spanish-American War of 1898 was a brief but consequential conflict in which the United States emerged as a global power, acquiring territories including Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Each of these wars changed the shape of the country and the direction of its history in ways still felt today. So if you are asked, name one war fought by the United States in the 1800s, any of these answers is correct. The War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, or the Spanish-American War.
Name the U.S. war between the North and the South. The war between the North and the South is the Civil War. It is also sometimes called the War between the States or the War of the Rebellion. We have touched on the Civil War in previous episodes, but it is worth taking a moment here to absorb the scale of what it was. From 1861 to 1865, the United States split in 2. The northern states, called the Union, fought to preserve the country. The southern states, which had seceded to form the Confederate States of America, fought to preserve their way of life, which was built on the institution of slavery. More than 600,000 soldiers died. Entire cities and regions were destroyed. The question of whether the United States would survive as a nation was genuinely uncertain for 4 years. And when the war ended with Union victory, did not resolve everything. The legal end of slavery through the 13th Amendment was followed by decades of violence, discrimination, and the systematic denial of rights to Black Americans that would not be formally addressed again until the Civil Rights Movement of the 1950s and 60s. The Civil War is not ancient history. Its consequences are woven into the fabric of the country every new citizen is now joining. So if you are asked, name the U.S. war between the North and the South, the correct answer is the Civil War.
The Civil War had many important events. Name one. The Civil War was filled with turning points that changed the course of the conflict and the course of the country. Any one of the following is an acceptable answer. The Battle of Fort Sumter in April 1861 was the opening engagement of the war. Confederate forces attacked the Union garrison at Fort Sumter in South Carolina, and the first shots of the Civil War were fired. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued by President Lincoln on January 1, 1863, declared all enslaved people in Confederate states to be free and transformed the war into a conflict explicitly fought for human liberty. The Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863 was the bloodiest battle of the war, with approximately 50,000 casualties over 3 days, and is considered the turning point after which Confederate forces never again had the initiative. The fall of Vicksburg on July 4, 1863, the same day as Gettysburg ended, gave the Union control of the entire Mississippi River and split the Confederacy in two. General Sherman's march to the sea in late 1864 cut a destructive path through Georgia to the Atlantic, breaking Southern supply lines and morale. And the surrender of Confederate General Robert E. Lee to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia on April 9, 1865, effectively ended the war. So if you are asked, the Civil War had many important events. Name one. Any of these answers is correct. Battle of Fort Sumter, Emancipation Proclamation, Battle of Gettysburg, Battle of Vicksburg, Sherman's March, surrender at Appomattox.
Question 94. Abraham Lincoln is famous for many things. Name one. Abraham Lincoln is remembered as one of the greatest presidents in American history, and the reasons why are inseparable from the Civil War. He was the 16th President of the United States, serving from 1861 until his assassination in April 1865. Just 5 days after Lee's surrender at Appomattox, he led the nation through the Civil War and preserved the Union at a moment when its survival was genuinely at risk. He issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, declaring freedom for enslaved people in Confederate states and transforming the moral purpose of the war. He delivered the Gettysburg Address in November 1863, a speech of only 272 words that redefined the Civil War as a test of whether a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to equality could endure. And he guided the passage of the 13th Amendment, which permanently abolished slavery, though he did not live to see its ratification. He was born in a log cabin in Kentucky in 1809, largely self-educated, and rose through hard work and an extraordinary legal and political mind to the presidency. His story remains one of the most powerful examples in American history of what is possible regardless of where you start. So if you are asked, Abraham Lincoln is famous for many things. Name one. Any of these answers is correct. Freed the slaves through the Emancipation Proclamation, saved or preserved the Union, led the United States during the Civil War, served as the 16th President, delivered the Gettysburg Address.
What did the Emancipation Proclamation do? The Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves in the Confederate States, issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1, 1863. It declared that all enslaved people in states in rebellion against the United States were free. We have discussed the Emancipation Proclamation in previous episodes, but this question returns to it because it is considered important enough to test twice. The USCIS test covers it again here in the context of Lincoln's legacy, and a clear, confident answer matters. The key facts to hold in mind. It was issued in 1863 during the Civil War. It applied to Confederate states, not to the entire country. It did not immediately free every enslaved person because Confederate authorities did not comply. But it changed the meaning of the war, authorized black men to serve in the Union Army, and laid the foundation for the 13th Amendment that made abolition permanent nationwide. Attorney Chris M. Ingram notes that the Emancipation Proclamation comes up repeatedly in the Citizenship Test, not because USCIS wants applicants to memorize a date, but because understanding what it did and why it mattered is considered part of truly knowing the country. It is one of the most consequential executive actions in American history. So if you are asked, what did the Emancipation Proclamation do? The correct answer is, it freed the slaves in the Confederate States, or it declared that all slaves in Confederate states were free.
What U.S. war ended slavery? The Civil War ended slavery in the United States. While the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 was the turning point, it was the Union victory in the Civil War in 1865 that made the end of slavery possible across the entire country. The war's conclusion led directly to the ratification of the 13th Amendment in December 1865, which permanently abolished slavery everywhere in the United States. The Civil War was therefore both the conflict that nearly destroyed the country and the conflict that forced it to resolve the contradiction it had carried since its founding. A nation built on the principles of liberty and equality that had institutionalized the enslavement of human beings. The war's resolution did not immediately deliver equality, but it removed the legal foundation on which inequality had been built. So if you are asked, what U.S. war ended slavery? The correct answer is the Civil War.
What amendment says all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens? The 14th Amendment says that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. Ratified on July 9, 1868, the 14th Amendment was one of the 3 Reconstruction Amendments passed after the Civil War to address the rights of formerly enslaved people. The 13th abolished slavery, the 14th established citizenship and equal protection under the law. The 15th, which we will discuss next, granted black men the right to vote. The 14th Amendment is one of the most consequential amendments in the Constitution's history. Its citizenship clause directly overturned the Supreme Court's 1857 Dred Scott decision, which had ruled that black Americans, whether free or enslaved, could not be citizens. Its equal protection clause became the legal foundation for the civil rights movement a century later, and has been used in landmark cases protecting the rights of women, immigrants, and many other groups. For every person watching this video who was born in the United States to immigrant parents, your citizenship rests on the 14th Amendment. For every person who will naturalize and take the oath of allegiance, your citizenship also rests on the 14th Amendment. It is the constitutional guarantee that brings every naturalized citizen into the full membership of the nation. So if you are asked, what amendment says all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens? The correct answer is the 14th Amendment.
When did all men get the right to vote? All men got the right to vote after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, with the ratification of the 15th Amendment in 1870. The 15th Amendment declared that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. It was a direct response to the end of slavery and the need to protect the political rights of formerly enslaved black men. It is important to understand what what the 15th Amendment did and did not accomplish. It prohibited the explicit denial of voting rights based on race. But in the decades that followed, Southern states used poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, and outright violence to prevent black men from exercising that right. Full enforcement of the 15th Amendment did not come until the Voting Rights Act of 1965, nearly a century later. The right to vote is precious, in part because it was so long denied to so many, and because the people who fought for it understood that without it, every other right was vulnerable. So if you are asked, when did all men get the right to vote? Any of these answers is correct. After the Civil War, during Reconstruction, with the 15th Amendment, or in 1870.
Name one leader of the women's rights movement in the 1800s. The women's rights movement in the 1800s was built by women who understood that the same principles the founders had written into the Declaration of Independence, that all people are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights, applied to them too. The men who wrote those words had not intended them to apply to women. These women disagreed. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton organised the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, the first women's rights convention in American history, where they drafted the Declaration of Sentiments, modelled deliberately on the Declaration of Independence, demanding equal rights for women, including the right to vote. Sojourner Truth, a formerly enslaved woman and extraordinary orator, delivered her famous speech known as "Ain't I a Woman?" in 1851, making the argument that the rights being claimed for women must include black women. Lucretia Mott was a Quaker minister and abolitionist who co-organised Seneca Falls with Stanton. Lucy Stone was a pioneering suffragist and abolitionist who became the first woman from Massachusetts to earn a college degree. And Harriet Tubman, whose story opened this episode, spent the years after the Civil War fighting for women's suffrage. The woman who had led armed military missions behind Confederate lines, who had rescued hundreds of people from slavery, who had never been caught, spent her final decades advocating for a right she herself would never live to exercise. She died in 1913, 7 years before the 19th Amendment granted women the vote in 1920. So if you are asked, name one leader of the women's rights movement in the 1800s. Any of these answers is correct. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Lucretia Mott, or Lucy Stone.
Name one war fought by the United States in the 1900s. The United States fought 5 significant conflicts in the 20th century, and any one of them is an acceptable answer. World War I, from 1917 to 1918 for the United States, was the first global conflict in which American forces played a decisive role, helping defeat the Central Powers and establishing the United States as a world power. World War II, from 1941 to 1945 for the United States, was the defining conflict of the 20th century. America entered after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 and played a central role in defeating both Nazi Germany in Europe and Imperial Japan in the Pacific. The Korean War, from 1950 to 1953, was fought to defend South Korea against invasion by Communist North Korea. The Vietnam War, from approximately 1965 to 1975 for U.S. combat forces, was a deeply divisive conflict fought to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. And the Persian Gulf War of 1991 was a swift coalition operation that liberated Kuwait from Iraqi invasion. The law offices of Chris M. Ingram notes that understanding this timeline matters for the Citizenship Test, not just as a list of names, but because each conflict reflects a moment when the United States made a choice about what kind of role it would play in the world. So if you are asked, name one war fought by the United States in the 1900s, Any of these answers is correct. World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, or the Persian Gulf War.
You have just covered 10 questions that trace the arc from the Civil War through the defining conflicts of the 20th century, with the expanding rights of citizenship woven through all of it. The 13th, 14th and 15th Amendments, the women who fought for the vote, the wars that shaped the world. Now let us see what has stuck. Pop quiz. Answer out loud. Name one war fought by the United States in the 1800s. Answer. War of 1812, Mexican-American War, Civil War, or Spanish-American War. Name the US war between the North and the South. Answer. The Civil War. The Civil War had many important events. Name one. Answer. Battle of Fort Sumter, Emancipation Proclamation, Battle of Gettysburg, Battle of Vicksburg, Sherman's March, or surrender at Appomattox. Abraham Lincoln is famous for many things. Name one. Answer. Freed the slaves / preserved the Union / 16th President / led the US during the Civil War / Gettysburg Address. What did the Emancipation Proclamation do? Answer. Freed the slaves in the Confederate States. What US war ended slavery? Answer. The Civil War. What amendment says all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens? Answer. The 14th Amendment. When did all men get the right to vote? Answer. After the Civil War / during Reconstruction / 15th Amendment / 1870. Name one leader of the women's rights movement in the 1800s. Answer. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Lucretia Mott, or Lucy Stone. Name one war fought by the United States in the 1900s. Answer. World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, or Persian Gulf War.
Several questions in this episode overlap with content from earlier episodes. The Emancipation Proclamation appears in both Episode 8 and Episode 10. The Civil War is referenced across multiple questions in this block. That repetition is deliberate. The USCIS test returns to the same events from different angles because truly knowing American history means understanding not just what happened, but how each event connects to what came before and after. The best way to approach the questions in this episode is to practice them as a connected sequence, rather than isolated facts. The Civil War caused the end of slavery. The end of slavery required the 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment established citizenship for all. The 15th Amendment gave black men the vote. The women's rights movement fought for the 19th Amendment. Each answer is a link in the same chain.
And if there are still immigration steps between where you are now and the naturalization waiting room, the law offices of Chris M. Ingram has been helping people navigate those steps for over 20 years, from EB-1 and EB-2 green cards to O-1 visas and beyond. Their team has guided thousands of professionals and families all the way to the citizenship interview. You can learn more and request a free consultation at breakthroughusa.com.
Harriet Tubman made 13 trips back into the South. She never lost a single person she was guiding to freedom. When people were afraid and wanted to turn back, she told them they could not. There was no going back. She was never caught.
She spent the last years of her life at a home she had built in Auburn, New York, caring for the elderly and the poor. She still could not vote. The country she had risked her life for more times than most people could count had not yet extended to her the most basic right of citizenship. she kept going anyway.
The 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, 7 years after her death. Her name is one of the accepted answers on the citizenship test you are preparing for right now. You are part of the same story she was part of, a country still becoming what it promised to be.
You have now completed questions 91 through 100. 10 more answers locked in. 10 more steps towards the moment everything changes. We will see you in the next lesson. Keep going. You have got this.